Welcome to Game Fondue Reviews. In this video, we're going to take a look at Dungeon Twister the card game. Dungeon Twister the card game is a two-player card game in which players are going to form an army of monsters and adventurers to do battle in a maze-like dungeon. Let's jump right in with a description of the rules, see a few example turns being played, then I'll be back for some closing remarks. This is the setup for Dungeon Twister card game. To set up, each player is going to pick a color and take all cards in that color, along with putting their action wheel with the 0 side facing the board nearby. Then the players are going to select a scenario card. In this case, we're using this one that indicates how many points you need to win the game. In this case, it's 5, and how many of every different thing you're going to use. As indicated on the scenario card, you're going to take a number of pairs of rooms. In this case, the scenario card shows 10 rooms, so we're going to need 5 pairs of rooms. It's important that if you choose to not use a room, you also do not use its pair. So after you've chosen the indicated number of pairs of rooms, you're just going to shuffle them up and deal them out randomly face down like so. From here, players are going to select objects and character cards as indicated on the scenario card. So we can see here, each player is going to use 5 objects, and each player is going to use 8 characters. There's 3 different ways to select them as laid out in the rulebook. The first is everybody just takes their group, and they're going to pick secretly and simultaneously. So their groups might be very different or very similar in this case. The other 2 ways to pick are you lay out one of each copy of all cards, and players are going to draft them by alternating turns. In one version, if you draft something, the other player cannot pick that, and in the other version, if you draft something, both players take a copy of it. So one results in completely different groups, and one results in completely the same groups. In this example, we're going to be playing using the completely the same group draft variant. Once players have selected their teams, you're ready to begin the setup phase. In the setup phase, players are both going to secretly put 2 of their characters face down in front of their play area, and once both players have done that, they can flip them face up, and they can orient them however they'd like, but more on orientation later. From there, players are going to alternate placing an object or character face down on the indicated spaces of the board. You can see based on the scenario card that this space can hold 2 on that side, and this can hold 2, and all of the spaces are 2 except the middle, which holds 3 on either side. So the players took turns alternating. They can place wherever they want. They didn't have to place on a certain side, although blue placed a lot over here and yellow placed a lot over here. After all the characters and objects are set up in accordance with the scenario card, as you can see here, they'll always be face down. You're ready to start the game. During the game, players alternate turns composed of 2 phases, which are earning action points and using action points. The game ends as soon as one player reaches the required number of victory points as indicated on the scenario card. In our case, it's 5 victory points to win the game. In the earning action points part of a player's turn, they're going to gain action points by rotating their action wheel. During the first turn of the game only, you're going to rotate it 2. So you're going to gain 2 action points, but in all future turns, including the first turn of the second player, you're going to gain 3 action points. It is possible to go beyond 3, in which case there is a back side that goes from 4 to 7. After gaining action points, a player may take up to as many actions as they have action points, but a player may never end their turn with more than 3 action points. If they do, they'll just finish with 3, and any unused ones will be lost. All actions in this game cost 1 action point, and when you perform one, you should rotate your action wheel so the lower number is facing the board. You can never go below 0 action points either. There's a number of possible actions you can take, and they include revealing a room, moving a character, rotating a room, using a jump card, using a character ability, using an item ability, initiating close combat, or initiating ranged combat. We'll start by going over how to reveal a room. If you have a character adjacent to another room, you can reveal that room. At the beginning of the game, you can always reveal the 2 rooms in front of the 2 characters you start with face up. So for 1 action point, you would turn this down and you would reveal a room in front of one of your characters. When you reveal a new room, the active player is going to reveal all cards in that room. We can see here that these 2 guys are located in this room, while these 3 are in this room, these 2 are in this room, and so on. And at this time, the active player gets to choose the location of all characters in that room, whether his own or his opponent's, and all of his opponent's objects. But after he's done that, his opponent gets to choose where any of his objects would be located. So let's look at a more complicated room. Let's pretend this one was revealed because somebody had a character adjacent to it. So all of these were flipped face up. If it was this guy as the active player, he would first get to choose the location of this and this. However, his opponent would get to choose the location of this because it is his item. So at this time, the way you choose locations of things is you orient them so they are facing a certain symbol toward the board. You can see every room has 4 different symbols in it, and those symbols represent where characters will be standing during the game. So for instance, if he turned this one this way, he would not be able to turn any other that way. Only one character and item can be put in a single location when a thing is revealed. So maybe he'll put this guy here, and then his opponent could choose where to put this. So in this example, this troll is in this blue location here, this guy is in this stone location down here, and this bow is over here. The next possible action you can take during your turn is to move one of your characters. So let's pretend some more rooms were flipped so we have some spaces to move. You can move a character up to its movement points, but it always costs you 1 action point to move a character that much. We can see here this troll has a movement point of 1, so it can only move 1 space, while this guy has a movement point of 2, meaning he can move up to 2 spaces. So if it was the yellow player's turn, for instance, we can see he's in this blue area. This troll is in this blue area here, and that is adjacent to this one because it's not blocked by a wall, an arrow slit, a closed door, a pit, pit or anything like that. So if he wanted to, he could move for one space from here to here. And in that time, he would just slide this guy up here into that location, but keep him facing toward the new area that he's in. Characters can freely enter and move through zones containing friendly characters and wounded enemy characters. Alternatively, however, characters can enter a zone containing an enemy, but they cannot move through it. So for instance, if this telepath was here and he has a movement of 2, if he wanted to go up 1 to here, there's an enemy troll there, so he would have to stop. He cannot move through that zone. It's also important to note it's legal for a character to move off their own side of the board, in which case they would have to be on the edge facing the edge of the board. So if this guy was here, for instance, he could move down here with this guy. Also, players off the edge of boards can move onto it if they're facing the right direction. So for instance, this guy is facing up here, which does not work. However, if he was facing this symbol, which is right next to it, he could move into that area for one of his movement points. With that said, you cannot freely rotate characters in areas because they're in a particular zone, but guys that are not yet on the board, that is off the edge of your zone, can be rotated for 1 movement point. So for instance, if this guy was facing this way, you could rotate him all the way to here for 1 movement point. You could even jump him to the other starting edge and rotate him, even though that seems like it would be 2 movement points. That just costs 1 as well. So this guy here could jump over here and face this way for 1 movement point, and then move in for his second. Also, as characters move, they may freely pick up items that they pass along the way. They don't have to stop their movement to do so, and it doesn't cost them an action point. So for instance, if this bow was up here, this guy could move in to that space for 1 movement and pick up the bow, even though he cannot continue moving because he's sharing a space now with an enemy. Each character can hold 1 item or 1 wounded hero. It's also possible for characters to freely drop items in any space they pass through. Again, they don't have to stop their movement, it doesn't count as anything, or even trade them to an ally. So for instance, if this guy was to move down here, he would now share a space with this ally, and he could freely give that item to the ally at this time. If that ally also had an item, they could exchange. While on the topic of items, I do want to point out a lot of items have passive effects that are always in play, while others can be activated by spending an action point. But all the items we're going to be looking at in this video are continuously active and do not require any action points to activate. One of the objects of the game is to get your characters off the other player's edge of the board. If you do so, that character will be removed from the map, and you'll just keep it in front of you to represent 1 victory point. For every character you get off, you score a point. It is important to note, however, that the enemy can block you. So for instance, if this guy was in this location here, which is adjacent to the edge, so normally he could move off. If this guy was facing the same edge, he could block this guy from getting out, so he would not be able to move through him off the edge of the board at that time. Another possible action you can do during your turn is to have one of your characters rotate a tile. Now, if they're in the rotation space, and you can always see it because it's labeled with a rotating gear, they can rotate that space, or if it's face up, it's pair. So for instance, this guy's in the correct area to rotate this for 1 action point. He could either rotate this one this direction, because that's the way the arrow is going, or rotate its pair this direction, but only 1 turn. You can spend as many actions as you want to alternate rotating this one and its pair in the correct direction. Another possible action is to play a jump card. So for instance, if it was the blue player's turn here, maybe he could throw this jump card down, and what that allows him to do is to jump over a pit. So for instance, he could jump over this pit here, so he could go right into the green area of the board. And then jump cards, once played, are totally out of the game, so you are limited in how many you have. However, after you use your 3 jump cards, you can also continue to take jump actions by discarding any of your non+0 combat cards. You can't discard your +0, but you would just show the card to your opponent, discard it, and then you can take a jump as normal. It's also important to note you cannot take a jump over a pitfall if you're going to jump into an area with an enemy. You can jump into an area with a wounded enemy, but not a regular enemy. So for instance, this guy's in this green area here. If he wanted to jump over this pitfall to the blue area, but this guy was there, he would not be able to do so. Before moving on to combat, I do want to point out some characters also have abilities that cost 1 action point to use. For instance, the troll can heal itself for 1 action point. And if it was wounded, it would just flip itself face up. But we're going to talk about wounded characters very shortly as we go over combat. The first type of combat we're going to talk about is close combat, and for 1 action point you can initiate combat with an enemy or all enemies in the same location as you. So for instance, if both of these trolls were in this green location here, they could initiate a close combat against each other. However, if this goblin was also in there, this troll would be attacking both of them at the same time. This can be extended even further if you have some allies in the same area, as anybody in the same area is going to be involved in the group combat. So in this example, it would be 2 yellows versus 2 blues because they're all in the same place. Regardless of how many characters are involved on each side, both players are going to put one of their attack cards face down. So they're just going to simultaneously do this, and they're both going to reveal the attack card at the same time. So for instance, this guy would have added 3 to his attack value, while this guy would have added 2. And any card you play besides a 0 value card is just going to be discarded from the game, but the 0 does return to your hand after you play it. So the way you resolve the combat is you add up the total attack power of all guys involved. We can see this guy's a 1, this guy's a 4, so that's 5. while these guys are a 4 and a 2, so that's 6. So it would be 6 plus the value of their card. We can see here that these guys won because their total exceeds theirs. So any of the defeated players will become wounded. Any wounded character is just flipped face down. They no longer have an ability except a troll who can heal himself. And any wounded characters also for future battles have an attack value of 0. If, however, the total attack values, cards plus guys involved, was tied, nobody would lose anybody to become wounded. They would all just stay face up as normal. I also want to point out, if you attack a guy that's face up, for instance, this guy attacked him here, the wounded guys would not jump in to aid him. But if a wounded guy was attacked, so one of these two attacked this wounded guy, the unwounded heroes in the same spot will jump in to fight with him. Also, if a wounded hero is ever attacked by itself, even though it has an attack power of 0, you're still going to put a card face down and reveal it to add to the battle result. It's also important to note that if you wound a character during your turn, you cannot attack that same character again. So in the example we gave, these two guys wounded these two guys. These characters here could not be attacked again this turn. They could be attacked again in future turns. I also want to point out, if you ever defeat a wounded character, they're removed from the board and you get 1 victory point. So you get victory points in this game 2 ways: by getting off the other player's edge or by defeating wounded characters. In that case, you would just take the character, put it in front of you, and that represents your victory point. There are also a few special rules related to wounded characters that I want to go over this time. The first is that the wounded character can take no more actions, except for the troll, who can heal itself. No other wounded character can really do anything on your turn. Another thing is, if a character gets wounded while holding an item, it's still going to be holding that item. However, anybody can steal that item from that character. So for instance, this guy, while moving, could just take this rope from this guy. Also, wounded characters can be picked up by their allies and carried like items, but as usual, you're limited to one thing. So you can't carry a wounded guy and an item. You do one or the other. It's also important to note, if you carry a wounded guy off the board, you do not get a victory point for him. However, he just gets removed from the game. But you do get a victory point for the guy that carried him off. Also, wounded guys cannot block you, so if this guy here was wounded, it doesn't matter what area of the board he was in, you could still move off past him. Lastly, anybody who's carrying a wounded guy, if they lose a combat, the wounded guy dies immediately and the other player scores 1 VP. So this guy here is carrying this wounded guy. If he was to lose and become wounded himself, this guy is dropped and dies, and the other player scores 1 victory point. The last thing I want to point out about close combat is if somebody is facing you off the edge of the board, so for instance this guy is facing this gear here, if you're in that gear, you can initiate close combat with him as if he was in the same space as you. The last possible action a player can take during their turn for 1 action point is to initiate ranged combat. The crossbowman can initiate ranged combat, and anybody carrying a bow can initiate ranged combat. To initiate ranged combat, you pick an enemy you have line of sight with that's not in your same zone. So for instance, if this guy was in here and his enemy was in that same spot as well, he could not initiate ranged combat with him. However, if the enemy was up here, he could, because line of sight in this game is taken in a straight line from anywhere you would like to the target area. So as long as it can reach the area, we can see here this, of course, is continuous with this without being blocked by a wall, another character, or a closed portcullis, which is just these red lines here, then you can engage with them at ranged combat. I want to emphasize that zones containing items, rotation gears, and pits do not block line of sight. You can shoot somebody over a pit. Also, if the attacker is in a zone adjacent to an arrow slit, we can see here this guy is in this part here. There's a little arrow slit here. He can shoot through that way because he's adjacent to it, and it's just going to run straight. So if the enemy was down here in this zone, he could shoot him as well. It's also important to note, as with close combat, you cannot shoot somebody in ranged combat that's already been wounded earlier this turn, but they were wounded in a previous turn, that's okay. Also, as with close combat, some other characters besides the attacker and its target may become involved as well. The first other type to become involved is any other allies of the attacker that also have ranged combat that can see the defender. So for instance, if this guy was shooting from here to this guy over here, but this guy was here with the bow, he also has line of sight through this arrow slit, so he would shoot at him too with his ranged attack value. The bow's ranged attack value is 1. He would ignore his regular close combat attack value. So the value would be 3 from this guy plus 1 from him for a total of 4. Moreover, any offensive allies on the same spot as the defending unit will also attack. And if these guys attack, defensive allies in the same spot will fight as well. So in this case, we have 2 shooters and a couple guys on the same spot as this defender here. So they're all engaged in combat at this time. Combat's going to resolve exactly the same way, with adding up the different values of people's attack, whether they're close combat or range. Plus, both guys are going to put 1 card face down and reveal it at the same time. The only difference here is the shooter cannot be wounded as a result of losing the combat, but people in close combat can be. With that, the game's going to proceed. If you get 5 points in this particular scenario, you win. Other scenarios will be different amounts of points, but as soon as you get those points, you're the winner of the game. Let's go into this example playthrough. So the first thing players are going to do is they're going to put 2 of their character cards face down in front of their areas, and both of them are going to do this simultaneously. Now, beginning with whichever player is going to go first, they're going to take turns placing things out face down as indicated on the scenario card. We can see here each of these are going to hold 2 in either direction, and each of these in the center are going to hold 3. So the yellow player is going to go first, and he decides he's going to put his telepath way down here near the other guy's edge. This guy's thinking is similar, but he's going to put the troll up near the other guys. So they're going to alternate. They can place items or characters. It doesn't matter, but it's totally secret. And they can place them in any spaces that aren't all the way filled. So after all players have placed all their guys out on the board, we're going to proceed with the next part of the game. We'll jump back to that point so you can see what happens. Welcome back. Now that all the spaces on the map have been filled, everybody's going to flip up their 2 guys in front of their edge of the board, and they can orient them however they'd like. This guy decides he wants to turn this guy this way. He's going to put this guy like so. This guy's just going to leave them the way they are. The orange player is going to go first, so during the first turn of the game you only gain 2 action points. All future turns it's going to be 3, so then he can take 2 actions with his guys. He decides first he's going to flip up this tile because it's in front of this guy, so he does so at this time. Now you can see he's not facing a way to get in it because he'd have to be facing this symbol or this symbol, but he's going to reveal these 2 at the same time. This is his opponent's item, so he's going to get to place it along with everything else. So he decides he's going to go ahead and put this guy in the gear section, which is up here, and he's going to put this item down near this guy. And then for his second action, he decides he's just going to flip this tile as well because this guy is adjacent to this spot over here because he's located here and that doesn't have any walls. So he flips that up. He's going to reveal these guys and put them out on the board. So he's going to put this guy in the rotation section, and then his opponent can decide where this item goes after he's done picking everything else because you can never place your own items. He decides to put it in this green section here. So with that, he's totally out of action, so he can't do anything else. But remember, you can save up to 3. So this guy's turn, he's going to go up to 3 because that's how all future turns work. He's going to take a turn just like that. He's going to begin by revealing this space here. So with that, we're going to jump ahead a little bit later in the game so you can see some more interesting situations. We've progressed a little more in the game. It's now the blue player's turn again. He has 3 action points, and with his first, he's going to decide to move this guy. We can see this guy is located in this section here, and he has 4 movement points. So for his action, he gets to move 4 times. Also, his special ability is he can jump over pitfalls. So for 1, he's going to go into this space here, and for 2, he's going to go up to this location here, which is the same spot as this assassin, but he brings his sword with him. So now he's going to engage in close combat with that assassin as his next action. So he turns the action wheel, and they're going to fight. They both have strength 2 because he's carrying a sword, and his regular strength is 1, while hers is 2. So they're both going to simultaneously pick what card to use and put it face down. So this guy puts his card face down, as does the other guy. Also, the assassin has a special ability that she does not wound. She just kills things outright. So she doesn't know what to expect here, but they both put their cards face down. They reveal. This guy revealed a +6. This guy revealed a +4. They're both discarded even when you lose, but the 6 is going to be a higher total, so this guy is wounded at this time. Now he can take no more actions unless a cleric heals him. With that, we're going to jump ahead to the end of the game so you can see the final situation. Welcome back. So now the end of the game. Each player has 4 victory points, which you can see in front of him, and we need 5 to win. It's the blue player's turn, so he's going to add 3 to his action counter, and he's going to go ahead and attack this guy with range. He's in the blue section, and that guy is in the green section, so you can see across that pitfall there. So he's going to shoot him. Both players are basically down to their only 0 cards, so they're going to reveal. And unfortunately, this guy is wounded. Now that he's wounded, he can move through him, so for his next action, he's going to move 2 spaces because this guy moves 2. So he's going to go here and right off the board at the edge there. And that's going to be his 5th victory point, so the game is over, and the blue player wins. I want to preface the comments I'm about to make by saying I do like the game. There's a tremendous amount of game in this tiny little box with all the different characters and abilities and items that you can have and all the battles that can ensue with the different rooms and different places and all those things. However, the way you have to sort of lay out the card and then twist it to indicate where it is has made the game essentially unplayable with me, with new players, because there's just too much information on the board, especially if you're using one of the more complicated scenarios with all the different things in them, where you have to sort of twist these guys and see where they are, because you have to constantly look to see who's where and whatnot. So if you're going to play this, I would strongly recommend using little pawns or tiddlywinks or something. You need some way to mark these in the spots, unless you've played the game, tons of times where you can just really quickly glance and figure out where everything is. But when the scenario is big enough, impractical. Also, for new players, the cards are very busy. There's like a lot of symbols all over the cards, and there's drawings on them and art, and it's all very pretty and all that, but it's a little bit confusing. So it would be nice if they were just a little cleaner, maybe a little bit less visual. At least I always prefer, the gameplay to the art, but some people love the art. So with that, I think there's maybe a little bit too much art on them, a little bit less in functionality. Also, there's a lot of rule questions that come up during the play because there's a lot of things that aren't entirely clear. So that's just something to watch out for. But Board Game Geek is always a good resource to figure those things out. But like I said at the beginning, there is a tremendous amount of game in here. There's so many different characters, and there's different ways to play it. If you were going to draft the same team or different teams, or however you want to do it, or just secretly choose your team. It's really a lot of fun, and it's a nice strategic little experience in the gameplay. So if you add some tiddlywinks or something to mark where things are, I would strongly recommend that maybe this is one for checking out if you have a two-player gaming partner that would like this type of thing, because it is strictly a two-player game, but it is pretty neat considering it's very, very cheap on the internet at this time.